Hello, and welcome to the April edition of the Dance Talk series. Today I'm happy to welcome two speakers from the MIT Media Lab. Philip Schmidt, who will be joining us in a little bit, is Director of Learning Innovation at the MIT Media Lab, where he leads the ML Learning Initiative, teaches courses, conducts research on learning communities. And here with me is also Catherine McConaughey, and she's the coordinator of the ML Learning Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. Today, Philip and Catherine are talking about Unhangouts, experiments in participant-driven online events. And Unhangouts draw inspiration from the unconference model that has been around for a while, and they seek to provide an opportunity for users to engage in participatory online learning experiences. So if you are watching this right now online, the live stream of the Hangout, and you have any comments or questions, feel free to submit them during the talk, and we'll get back to them after the presentation. So now, Catherine, I'm looking forward to your talk, and I hope that Philip can join us on time.
Yeah, sounds great. He should hopefully be joining us soon, but until then, I'm sort of happy to get started. Thank you for the introduction, and I guess, let me see if I can get my presentation up, and I will get started. Let's see. Everything seemed good to go now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Unhangout. It is a platform that we have developed here at the MIT Media Lab. And I thought that it would be useful to sort of start out by telling everyone a little bit about the type of learning that we're really interested in seeing here. The Media Lab has a very specific kind of learning, and the way that we articulate that is we usually call it creative learning. And so creative learning has 4 components, and they're the 4 Ps. So in this little graphic here, you can see projects, passion, play, and peers. And this is the kind of learning that we really try and design for, the kind of learning we really believe in. And basically, if you sum it into one sentence, it's basically that people learn best when they're working on projects that they're passionate about, with their peers, and they're doing it in an environment that's playful. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a game or something like that, but what we mean by that more is that it's an environment that makes it safe to take risks. It's an environment that makes it safe to fail. So we believe pretty strongly in this kind of learning, and we feel like the Media Lab and the learning community here with our students and researchers very much embodies these principles. We work very closely with Mitch Resnick, who sort of has come up with these, and they are very embedded in all of the work that he does. If anyone is familiar with Scratch or the Scratch online community, these are sort of the core foundational ideas behind all of that work. And so that sort of like situates us and the work that we do. Philip and I tend to think a little bit more about an adult audience of learners, and we usually think about online learning environments. And we try and think a lot about how we can embed these 4 values into online learning spaces. And so to give you a little bit of background on Unhangout, the reason that it started is that Mitch Resnick and Natalie Rusk and Philip Schmidt, who should be joining us in a little bit, they wanted to take a course that they had traditionally taught at the Media Lab that was based on these ideas of creative learning, and they wanted to put it online to a wider audience. And this was sort of right around the time that MOOCs were becoming very popular, and here at MIT there were a lot of professors who were doing online learning for the first time. And the course team sort of decided that they didn't really see tools that they were excited about using that would allow their students online to participate in the ways that the students in the classroom were able to. And so that is how the first prototype of Unhangout came about. One of the grad students who was here at the lab at the time was very interested in chat interfaces, and so he threw together a very rough prototype, and this is sort of what we think of as the initial first version of Unhangout, and it was basically just you could watch the live stream of the class that was going on, and if you were an online participant, instead of being able to actually sit in the lecture hall, you could participate in these sort of chat rooms with other online participants to discuss sort of you know, just have like a back channel for the class. And so this was the first version of it, and then as we were thinking about how to sort of build out the platform a little bit more, we sort of were very inspired by the unconference model. And for those of you that maybe aren't super familiar with the unconference model, I'll just sort of say a little bit about it. A typical traditional conference is one that has a schedule that is set beforehand. Typically, there are speakers and panels and sessions that you can attend, and that's sort of all done before any of the participants in the conference actually get there. So unconferences try and do that a little different. They bring together a group of people who share interests and skills and passions, and they sort of leave it up to them and put the faith in the community that is brought together to sort of build a schedule that everyone who's participating would like to see. So this sort of involves both a proposal process with individuals in the crowd sort of proposing sessions that they'd like to attend, proposing sessions that they'd like to lead, and then there's a schedule building time where people sort of vote, and then from the community sort of emerges like a shared, collectively built schedule for the day. And people, they really emphasize, unconferences really emphasize this rule of 2 feet, which is that, you know, if you're in a session and it's not doing it for you, or if you wanna really go check out something else, or it's just not what you thought it would be, like, you are encouraged to just like exercise your right to use your 2 feet and get up and walk around and switch places. And so we're really inspired by sort of like how participant created and how participant driven unconference events are. And we think that that aligns really well with some of the values of the type of learning that we like to see. And so that sort of lands us at some of these like Unhangout design values that sort of are integrated now into the current platform, which I'll show you sort of just after this. But I just want to mention a little bit some of the things that we try and sort of hold close to us and try and sort of make sure that we don't overrun the platform with features. Like, these are the things that we think about when we're trying to make decisions about the design of the platform. So we think it's really important that that Unhangout allows for synchronous events to happen. A lot of online interaction is asynchronous, and that makes a lot of sense for efficiency and for convenience and given everyone's lives. And once in a while, though, it's nice to have a synchronous event. And so we think that this is a really interesting constraint, and we think that it does a lot to help encourage interaction when everyone is sort of there with each other together. It creates a different feeling. Our events are also participant-driven, and this is really inspired by the unconference model. We want people who arrive at our events to feel like they have a lot of different ways and a lot of power to sort of influence the event, shape it, and also sort of get what they want out of it. And then the final value that we try and hold close is that we see Unhangout as a way of facilitating connections between people and also connections within larger communities. And so we also try and design features and things into the platform that allow people to connect with others that have shared interests, make it a little bit easier for them to find each other, and then also help them sort of stay in contact if they want to in their like existing networks outside of the platform. So having said all of that, I think you guys are probably, if you've never seen the Unhangout platform before, you're probably wondering a little bit what it looks like. If you want to go check it out on your own computer, you can. There's an event that we have that's sort of open, and this is the URL. You can sort of go check it out at any time. If you're listening right now and you want to go check it out while I talk through some of the layout of the platform, that would also be great. I realized, Philip and I realized only like too late that we could have tried to run this whole event in an Unhangout, but we didn't think of it in time. So anyway, this is a screenshot of sort of like an empty Unhangout event, and this page that you're looking at is typically called the lobby. This is a web page basically that all participants of the event are directed to, and when the event starts, they sort of are all connected to this page, and everyone is looking at it together. In the top left corner, you'll see a video window, and in that video window, admins can embed live or pre-recorded videos that everyone who is connected to the lobby will be watching synchronously. So on the back end of the platform for videos, we do some work to make sure that everyone's streams are synced up with one another. Just to the right of the video window, you see a chat room, and this chat window is just your typical chat. Anyone from the platform can talk with each other, and we like that it takes up a lot of the screen real estate because we want to sort of emphasize that in an Unhangout event, like talking with other participants in the chat while it's happening is sort of the main emphasis. To the right of the chat, you see a list. There's a little picture of me right there, but typically if there are more users connected, that whole side panel will sort of populate with little avatar pictures. Anyone that you have a little message conversation with in the chat will get added to the My Network section above the contact list. And then finally, the last component of an Unhangout is a section of the screen in the bottom left corner, which are the breakout rooms. So the breakout rooms are basically, you can create as many of them as you want, and they can be set between 2 and 10 people. And when any participant hits a join button, which you'll see right there, they are directed into a Google Hangout. So we leverage Google Hangout technology here to make these small breakout rooms possible. And I think it's probably obvious now why the platform is called Unhangout, since I mentioned our unconference influence and our leveraging of Hangouts. And the nice thing about these breakout rooms is that admins can create as many as they want, and they can name them anything they want. So if the goal of your event is sort of just to get people talking with each other, admins can create rooms, and they can just be called Breakout Room 1, Breakout Room 2, Breakout Room 3. And the idea is that when you open the breakout rooms, participants can just click join on any room that they please, and then they sort of end up in a room with, you know, up to 10 other people, and it's a video chat, so it's nice to be able to see each other's faces. But because we're inspired by the unconference model, we also have an option to make the breakout rooms be participant proposed, and that actually sort of mimics the schedule building of an unconference. And so in participant proposed mode, anyone who is in the Unhangout can click the propose a session button, and they can create a topic that they want to discuss, and then they can also vote on sessions that they are really interested in. And by doing that, you can create breakout rooms out of the sessions that get the most votes. And so just briefly, I want to mention that the view that I was just showing was sort of like a participant view. As an admin, if you're interested in running the event, you sort of have this pretty much the same screen, but an overlay of these like orange controls that allow you to sort of do some admin controls, but it's actually not that much that admins can do. And so since we sort of started on this Unhangout journey, we now have you know, around 17,700 users, which is really exciting. And we have worked with lots of different kinds of organizations to put on events. A lot of MOOC providers are interested in adding more discussion-based events to their courses, but we've also worked with organizations who are more community-based, and they want to sort of gather that community together. And so I think what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about some cool events that we've run that can sort of tell you a little bit more about how we use the platform. So one of the first events that we ran with a MOOC was a HarvardX course that was called Leaders of Learning, and they actually used the platform. They used the platform as a culmination event. So sort of at the end of the course, they had this sort of live event, and the professor was there, and everyone who was sort of part of the community was allowed to attend. And it was really exciting because this is one of our bigger events. This was a few years ago, but it was just so exciting to see these people who had sort of only interacted sort of on discussion boards be able to talk to each other in person for the first time. And in a survey that we gave afterwards, there was this really great quote that I think sort of helps to understand sort of like why Unhangout is such an interesting tool. So one of the participants said in a reflective prompt that interacting in a purely digital, out-of-sync environment always feels somewhat distant and impersonal. Seeing and hearing actual people in all their diversity reminded me of the enormous potential and the resources which this diversity brought to the course. And I think that this is definitely something that we try and design for, and it's really exciting to sort of see people bring this up on our surveys. One of the things about Unhangout that I think is really cool is that it's sort of more than just the sum of the sort of components that I explained to you earlier. There's like this really interesting interplay between the fact that in the lobby you can have scale with up to 250 people, but you can also have, in that event, you can have intimacy sort of in the breakout rooms where you get to see and hear people sort of in a video chat style room. So it's really interesting to think about what that does for a community when you can sort of get a sense of the big group that's brought together, and you can also get a sense of sort of who each of those people are. And we're excited that we can try and design for something like that that happens exclusively online. So we also, another event that we ran was it was another iteration of learning creative learning. So we ran a version 2, and that time we had a much more robust Unhangout platform, and we actually ran weekly events. So it wasn't just sort of a one-off event. It was a series of events, and that was really exciting because we saw some really interesting things start to emerge. People, typically the goal of these events was sort of to get people talking about the projects that they had been working on the week before. And we saw people, so we didn't really necessarily care sort of what the topic of the breakout room was. We just wanted people to join. But we actually saw people who had been talking the week before. They would talk with each other in the chat before the breakout rooms were open, and they would say things like, "Oh, hey, like let's all try and be in breakout room A again." And we would see like people who had known each other and met each other in the Unhangout in the previous weeks, to sort of trying to continue the groups that they had made in the breakout rooms. And so that was also some really cool things that we saw emerge from this platform. I don't know if you guys remember, but Boston kind of got hammered with snow last year. This is a picture of my neighbor's car, which you kind of can't distinguish from a snow pile, but one of the other really cool uses of Unhangout that we saw was a couple professors from Harvard and MIT were running courses, and we had snow days like 3 weeks in a row on Mondays, and so there were a lot of professors who had, Monday or Tuesday classes that just got canceled like 3 weeks in a row. So by the third week they were like sort of fed up with it, and they contacted us and they're like, "Can you make us an Unhangout event so we can run our class online?" And we did this with a couple of different professors, and it was really a fun sort of last-minute exciting way of seeing people use the platform. So this is an example of an event where everyone sort of gathered in it, sort of already knew each other in an in-person setting. One other event that I think is particularly interesting is the work that we've done with the organization that's called edCamp. And edCamp is a really cool organization that does teacher professional development, but in sort of an alternative way, and it's all unconference based. So they really do sort of what we have designed this platform for, but they do it in person. And so they have local educator communities in cities, and people volunteer to run these unconferences on the weekends, and it serves as an alternative form of professional development. So we collaborated with edCamp, and we decided to run an online edCamp on the Unhangout platform, and it was quite exciting. We saw that some really interesting things in some follow-up surveys that we did. So 48% of the people who joined our virtual Unhangout event were new edCamp participants. They had never been able to attend an in-person edCamp before. 50% 55% either proposed a session or voted on one, so that's fairly good for participation numbers as far as we've seen. 86% said that they felt it was a good alternative to traditional in-school professional development. And from those 2 online events, we inspired 15 new organizers to sort of run their own offline events. And we've also, I'm not sure exactly how many, but we also have had at least a few people run their own online events using Unhangout still. But I think one of the most exciting things that we saw sort of emerge from this series of events was that a lot of people started reporting that they felt more part of a broad sort of like national edCamp community as opposed to just being a part of a local teacher community. And I think that's evidenced in another quote that we received on one of our follow-up surveys. So this respondent said, I've attended 4 face-to-face edCamps in Philadelphia. Even though I was aware of the explosion of growth with edCamps all over the globe, I did not consider myself a part of the international edCamp community because I've only attended edCamps in my own backyard. Now that I've participated in this event and had a great discussion with people from all over the country, I really feel a part of the larger edCamp community. And so we think that this is another really interesting sort of artifact of the fact that we have these we can facilitate these participant-driven events in online spaces, and people can, it's much easier for people to attend and meet people that they wouldn't otherwise meet. One other thing that I sort of wanted to touch on before I wrapped up is a few newer features to the Unhangout platform, and we've tried to focus a lot on sort of this aspect of helping people make connections, helping people grow their personal communities, helping people build stronger communities. And so if you see here on this slide, after an Unhangout, there was one of our participants who tweeted out this quote, "Heterogeneity drives creativity." And he said, "I wish I knew the Twitter handle of Daniel who said that in our Unhangout." And then one of our students here at the lab who was doing her master's thesis on Unhangout saw this tweet, and she responded connecting him with the Daniel that he had met in the Unhangout. And then these 2 users were able to connect sort of after the Unhangout was over. And seeing a lot of examples like this, we sort of wanted to make this kind of interaction much easier on the platform. And so we built something that we call a follow-up email. And this is an example of what it would look like. This one is an email for me. And basically what it does is it just keeps track of anyone that you met in a breakout room and anyone that you directly interacted with in the chat, and it passes along, if they've opted in to sharing their contact information, it passes along their contact information, and we allow people to input their preferred method of contact in 3 things, whether it's an email address, a Twitter handle, or a LinkedIn profile. And you can see some of those people have opted to share all 3 or 2 or 1, and sort of it just shows you like how they would like to be contacted by you, and if you want to follow up with them after the event, this is sort of a great way to do it. And I think we really do want to encourage people to, we don't necessarily want to create a platform where everyone is interacting only on our platform. We want people to leverage their existing networks. We want them to use the asynchronous tools that they're already using to connect with these people. We want it to sort of fit seamlessly into their lives. So that's sort of a newer feature. And then in terms of the future of Unhangout, I think some of the things that we've been thinking about are grouping. And so we're interested in thinking about, like, are there ways that we can help people group themselves, or that we can do a little bit of automatic grouping for them to get people who have, more common interests together, things like that. And a lot of our thinking there is very much inspired by some of the work that's happening with Carolyn at CMU. We're also looking into some open source alternatives to Google Hangouts, just because we really believe in the open source model, and there's a big there's a fairly new but pretty robust development community of people who work with WebRTC, which is an open web standard, and we're interested in seeing if we can integrate that into our platform. And we're also really interested in doing more research across event series. So typically we have organizers who want to run single events, and more lately we've been actually talking with people who want to run sort of more of like a series of events, and we think that there's a lot of really interesting opportunities to do some research across and see aspects of community that come out sort of week to week when we're using this tool. So I think that is sort of all that I will say. I'm happy to sort of take any questions or have a nice discussion now. But if anyone is sort of interested in using the platform or learning more, you can go to our website, which is unhangout.media.mit.edu. You can contact me or Philip, and we will definitely sort of help you out. So I think that is it for my presentation, and I'm happy to sort of chat a little bit more. Yeah.
Thank you. So we didn't get any questions, but a comment on the Unhangout. So Derukshi commented that she enjoyed the Unhangout in edX education technology by Professor Eric, she said. So,
yeah. Eric Klopfer, who works here.
Oh, Eric Klopfer. All right, sure.
Yeah. His team has used Unhangout in some of their MOOCs. Yeah.
So positive feedback already. First comment. So
love to hear it.
Philip isn't here yet, but Carolyn has joined us in the Hangout. So I'm sure she has things to say about what you just presented. So I'm going to hand over to her.
Yeah. So I have a whole bunch of questions, actually. So fascinating presentation. And I have participated in an Unhangout once before and really enjoyed the experience. So and it sounds like you have a lot of ideas about work going forward that connect with some of the things I had been thinking about early on in your talk, which was, so let's say a researcher was really interested in being able to learn something from the kind of data that you're gathering. Would they be able to set up their own, say, Unhangout server locally, or can they get the data from Unhangouts that they host? So currently, if researchers are interested in integrating Unhangouts in their courses and then to be able to analyze the data, what data can they get back?
So yeah, so the whole project is open source. So if you wanted to spin up your own version of it, you could. We also host a version of it here at the lab, and that is usually where we see most people using it through. Given that the data that we collect is actually not that much, we haven't spent too much time sort of building out, or we also haven't spent too much time sort of building out ways of making it fairly easy to access that. So as of right now, if you wanted to do research, you definitely have to sort of do that in very close partnership with our team here. We intentionally don't collect too much data just because we don't do too much data-driven research, or we haven't tried to do that much on platform yet. And also, we don't store too much user information. Logins are with Google accounts. And we sort of just keep track basically of events that you have attended as a user, how long you were there, and then like if you went into a breakout room, what breakout room did you go into, and how long were you there? And then we keep archives of the chat. But I think that's sort of about it in terms of data that we collect. And I think that we have been thinking about ways that we can make that better or things like that, but that's sort of where we are right now.
I see. So, but the chat data is being logged.
Yes, it is.
And there are user IDs associated with the chat contributions?
I believe so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that, there were a couple of courses that were you saved the day because they had been canceled, but also that there were these MOOC platforms where people have the option of integrating these Unhangout activities in their courses. Mm-hmm. I was curious to know what kind of learning activities are people using these Unhangouts for? Have you looked at sort of how it fits into the instructional design?
Yeah, so I think we've seen a lot of different types of uses, a couple of which are so we've seen people use them sort of as like discussion groups. So for the MOOCs, like whatever the topic of the week is, people will sort of go in and they'll either be from, we've seen everything sort of from a very heavily facilitated version where there's like a TF or a TA in the breakout rooms with everyone sort of helping the conversation go. We've also seen sort of like just a question that is posed in the lobby and then people are sort of just left to their own devices to discuss. And the point of those types of activities is just to get people interacting with each other, just to get people exchanging ideas. We've seen more collaborative activities where people are supposed to be discussing a problem and they take shared notes, and then sort of those shared notes are all sort of combined together, and then at the end of the event there's sort of a wrap-up where the things that everyone has made are sort of tied together by one of the professors or something like that. We've also seen some sessions used sort of like as project feedback time or critique time, just to get feedback on things that you have been doing or things that you've been working on. One other interesting thing that we've also seen is a course from HarvardX that was doing deliberations that were a jury style. So they used the Unhangout platform sort of to get people talking to each other, and they had these like scripts of how they would interact and do jury deliberations. Yeah. So
that's so cool, because I'm actually really interested in jury research, so interested to hear somebody use this environment to do that kind of work. So one thing that is very interesting from our standpoint is obviously you presented some big successes, and it sounds like students have really enjoyed being able to interact with each other in this context. We had also seen in some chats that we had introduced into, like synchronous chats, into some MOOC courses, that students also expressed this desire to be able to interact again. They were so energized by the idea of meeting another person in a synchronous way from a course. But on the other hand, as designers, it's always interesting to know, what are the challenges? What are the things that could be better? What could we learn if we had the data that we could model that to overcome some of these, some things that you may have noticed, or just things that you'd like to see as capabilities that aren't currently there? What do you see as the big opportunities going forward?
Oh, I also just wanted to say quickly, hi to Philip since he popped in. And yeah, Philip, if you have anything to add to these questions, feel free to sort of jump in.
We also have questions from the audience, but first let's address what Carolyn just asked, maybe, and hi, Philip, too.
I think one of the major challenges that we've seen so far is so we feel like we're pretty good at sort of getting people, like giving people a prompt in the lobby, asking them to go talk with each other. I think the thing that we struggle with a lot is sort of when we come back, making meaning from those talks, making it feel like you didn't just have a conversation with 5 people and now it's over. Maybe sort of like somehow making it feel like everyone else who is having a conversation at the same time with you, doing something that sort of allows you to sort of distill information from that. And so the problem, and the reason that that's a struggle, is that it's hard to pull information from all of the breakout rooms because we don't necessarily want to snoop on them, but it's also hard to get people to take shared notes in the same place. So we haven't quite figured out how to do that. We don't have any mechanisms for them to submit feedback or summary mechanism, or a summary of what they talked about. And then typically, since that content sort of isn't predetermined, and if you're a facilitator of the event and you wanted to sort of do a live sort of on-the-fly wrap-up, we currently use Google Hangouts on Air technology to do those live things, but actually there's about a 45-second delay between like us talking right now and when a viewer would actually see it. So that actually makes it nearly, I would say, like nearly impossible actually to have a real-time interaction in the lobby where you like people are chatting and saying, oh, we talked about this, oh, we talked about this, and then you have to wait 45 seconds as a facilitator. So that delay actually sort of has a huge impact on our ability to sort of facilitate those things. So we're trying to think about a bunch of different approaches to tackling that, whether it's making making something that allows people to submit summary statements, figuring out a better way to distill information from conversations, fixing the delay, like adding a new technology that basically doesn't have as big of a delay, things like that.
Interesting. Oliver, did you say that there were questions from the audience?
Can I add one? I don't know if you guys can now hear me.
Yes.
Right.
And I don't know if Catherine mentioned this, but grouping is one of the other things we're very interested in. And so if you have these large communities come together, how can we very quickly help them find groups, join groups, stay in groups? How do they interact with each other in those small groups? So like that whole process from 1,000 people arrive and then they split into many small groups. I think we haven't found a really good way of doing that very quickly. So that's something we'd love to figure out. And then the other piece is, and I think this is not as common, but in some events it would be really interesting to aggregate things that are happening in the groups, so that you would get a better sense of what's the diversity of conversation across all these groups, especially if you're the person hosting the event. So you can coordinate a little more. You can say, hey, I'm seeing some themes emerging, even though the individual groups may not be aware of the fact that they're all talking about the same thing. So those kinds of facilitator tools, I think, would also be interesting.
Has anybody looked at, so I guess I'm assuming that the video gets recorded somewhere and that somebody could watch it after the fact, but maybe that's not true. But if it was true, I would be curious to know whether you think that some kind of automated summarization process could get a good read on what was happening across these groups from just looking at the chat, or whether the view you would get from the chat would be so skewed in terms of what the concerns were, what the issues were that came up. Has anybody kind of looked at enough of what's been going on to get a sense of that?
So I think in the small groups, we do encourage people to sort of chat with their video. So like they'll be speaking and they'll be sharing video. They won't necessarily be using the sort of text chat that is also a feature. There isn't an easy way to sort of grab that information from a Google Hangout, so we don't have access to that data. But I also am not sure that there is enough conversation happening in just the text chat to distill any kind of meaning from it, because we really think that there is a lot added sort of in people talking and people seeing each other. So we do encourage that kind of interaction. We are interested in thinking about if there's anything we can do along those lines with the lobby chat, depending on the length of the sort of like initial welcome. Sometimes people just say, welcome, go talk with each other. Sometimes people will say, welcome, now I want to present you with these ideas, and now I want you to go talk to each other. So when there's like sort of a longer form intro, the conversation that's happening in the chat room in the lobby tends to be a little, it definitely is, there are more contributions that you could maybe distill some meaning from.
Yeah, so in our own research on grouping, we have separated out kind of a pre-task and then the collaborative task that the people engage in. And so we then have kind of a whole community engagement around the pre-tasks where people post their own personal work and talk in the whole community setting about that. And we use that analysis of that discussion as a basis for assignment of students to groups. So I could imagine that something like that could easily be integrated with this Unhangout environment. I think in the Unhangout that I participated in that was hosted by Justin Reich, that we did have kind of a substantial discussion in the lobby before we broke off into groups. And that was sort of how we negotiated over what those breakout topics would be. They kind of emerged from that community level discussion. So yeah, but I guess the question really is how well that paradigm, that general paradigm, matches with how people want to be able to use it. As you pointed out, that's not in general what people are doing. A lot of times people are just coming and then being routed to groups. So hopefully over time some best practices will will emerge.
Yeah, and I think those best practices are both on the facilitation, like the design of the event, and I also think that there is some more that we can do to the design of the chat interface in the lobby that sort of will make it easier for people to communicate in ways that we want them to. So.
Does anybody, so to the extent that people come back and there is a facilitator for the engagement that happens when they come back to the lobby, I mean, I understand that there's this delay issue, but has there ever been kind of a reporting back kind of pattern where groups go off and have their discussion, but then, you know, maybe it's not like an interactive group discussion, but that they at least report back to the community what happened?
Yeah, we have seen a couple different groups try and do that. So one way is like having the facilitator, if there are facilitators in each small group, those facilitators will take notes in a shared space, and then that becomes a really good way of sort of reporting back for all the different conversations, but that does require sort of a big event team. We've also seen another event do live report backs. They will ask one person from each breakout room to volunteer in the chat, and then they will send that person. They will share the link to the Google Hangout on Air, and they'll say, okay, hop into the Hangout on Air right now and tell us what you talked about. Okay. And that is definitely, like, the platform right now doesn't make that kind of interaction easy in any way. Like, it's really just like kind of a hacky way of doing it. Like, you share the link and you tell people only click on it if you want to share something. And so it requires that you put a lot of trust in your users and things like that. It's not easy to do, but it actually, I think it works quite well. So like something like that is ideally something we would love to have integrated, where you could sort of like, someone could raise their hand or something from the lobby, and then you could pull them into a live broadcast and they could share a thought that they had or a summary of their group discussion, something like that. But since right now we're dependent on Google technology, the delay makes it a little tricky, and also just the interfacing between our platform and Google, the Google API stuff, is a little tricky as well.
So let's say somebody wanted to use this in their course, and early on in the course they had what would be kind of similar in structure to the Unhangout that I participated in, where there was a kind of a discussion, and then topics emerged, and we assigned ourselves to groups. And you had mentioned this issue that people, once they have had this discussion with the group, they'd like to actually come back maybe and talk to the same group. So you could imagine in a course that an instructor might set up an Unhangout that was sort of a persistent Unhangout with those groups that were created initially, that people could just come back in and go to the same space again at different times. Has anybody actually used it that way, and is that kind of a viable way of using it? Can you just have a long-standing Unhangout that sort of lasts for a semester-long course?
Yeah, you definitely can. We have seen people try and use it that way. Again, like, there aren't any features necessarily that prohibit you from doing something like that, but we also don't have anything that necessarily makes it easy to help people get back into the same group that they were in before, or something like that. But the event stays open. You can leave the groups that way. If somehow you have a way of sort of organizing people into groups and just saying, like, go to your room, and they know what that room is, then people, that is very easy. So an Unhangout event can stay open for as long as you want it to.
Yeah, I seem to remember from my experience that we created these breakout rooms, and then they had names. And so I would think, if you knew, for example, your group name, then if you came back in again and you saw the list, as long as you remembered the name, you should be able to click and get back in again. Right. Am I remembering correctly how it kind of works? Or
yeah, definitely. You're right. And then one other thing, actually, Philip, do you want to say something?
Probably the same as you, but we are working on a solution where you would report who's in what group, and so we could actually maintain the people who are in one group. They will only ever go back to that group, even over a long period of time. And one thing that could be interesting is, I guess, also if you did office hours for a course, and you said maybe it's not always on. I mean, it could always be on, but there won't be very many people. But you know that Thursday between 4 and 6, there'll be TA for any general questions about the class, and you can also use Unhangout for your work. And so like you have like these time slots where there's a little more support and more people show up. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, and I think that sort of gets at one of these other sort of design level things that we're always sort of talking about with Unhangout is like, are Unhangouts events or are Unhangouts rooms? And I think we don't have a good answer for that, so we sort of just let them be both.
We would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this question? Is it a room? Is it an event?
Yeah.
So to me, it feels more like an event, and the reason is because, so I would have liked to have thought of the breakout rooms as rooms, but I think that in terms of having breakout rooms that might be for project groups that would be persistent, one concern that I've seen come up in some of my collaborations is that instructors would like groups to have some control over who can come into their room. So let's say a room has been created for each project group. They should have a little privacy in their room that other students from other groups shouldn't be able to come in at will, and so it sounds to me, though, like the model that this is built on is very bottom-up and organic, and so you wouldn't want to place those controls because actually you wanted people to move between groups freely. You want new group, rooms to be created on the fly. So it seems to me there's sort of a difference in vision between, I think, how sometimes instructors would think about rooms that might be project rooms versus this very organic, open environment. So to me, the open environment feels more like a conference where there are these sort of birds of a feather sessions that kind of emerge organically and anyone can move between them. And that seems sort of what you were going for here, and that, adding a lock to the rooms would really go against, I think, your vision.
Yeah, I think that that's very, very spot on. And the other thing about, I do think that there is a lot of power in the platform and like the synchronous, and that kind of comes more towards the event. Like, you can drop into an Unhangout wherever you want. But I don't think that you're really not getting the full benefit of the platform if you're just sort of dropping in and there are only a couple other people there. Like, really the power of the experience is when you're there with a bunch of other people and you have the power to sort of choose your path through that event. I think I could imagine like that a tool that was explicitly designed just to be a space for people to meet for project teams would just be better at doing that than Unhangout would be. Because it's not necessarily, like you said, it's not necessarily what we're aiming to design for.
Have you ever gotten feedback from people who wanted additional kinds of interactions simultaneously within the space? Like, let's say, so obviously people can also just at the same time have a Google Doc open that they're all contributing to. Has anybody ever expressed the feeling that they wanted it to be more integrated, that there were other kinds of, like a shared whiteboard or some other way of supporting a connected group engagement along with what the video and the chat?
Do you mean like in the lobby or in the small groups?
In the small group rooms.
Yeah, I think definitely we hear a lot about sort of those types of things like collaborative note-taking, whiteboarding, easy access to like information that you want to find. And right now, since we're just using Google Hangouts, it's kind of nice in one way because like any app that's been built for a Google Hangout you can use in the Google Hangout. It does require that you know that it exists and you know how to pull it up, but that's nice. The other thing that makes it a little hard is like it's much harder for us to make types of things for the Google Hangout because we don't control that at all. So I think yes, the answer is to your question is yes.
I wanted to add a thought on the locked groups discussion, because I think Caroline is spot on that philosophically we had this vision that it's really bottom up and people create these spaces. But there is also kind of a benefit for people to say, okay, we're a team, we're going to go to this room, and it's going to work, the 5 of us. And if someone shows up, they should at least have to knock on the door, or like they should feel like, hey, these people are working with each other. I think that's the thing that's missing right now, that because you can't, like, it's so easy to just click join, and you don't realize that that throws you into the middle of this conversation. It totally kind of breaks the dynamics. So having some way of, like, maybe once the groups have formed, they all get their room, and people can knock on the window, and like, you know, they'll invite them in, but it's not like constant inflow from other people who then you don't know who they are, and like kind of making it a little less confusing. But yeah, it's hard sometimes. Like sometimes also just efficiency or like coordination, right? We're like, okay, it'll be much easier to coordinate that way. But then there's like sliding slope where you're like, no, but we start with this vision where everyone really is in control. And because you're making it easier and easier and easier, you have interface that's actually not as true to your original vision. So I thought that was a pretty good comment.
Yeah, and I think this is an issue that is becoming more interesting for us. Like up until now, or up until recently, I would say that like most people have been using Unhangout like in a way that's sort of like the goal of it is just like, let's get people who are a part of our community to talk with each other. And a lot of it will be like the first time. And like it'll just be like it's a success if like they're sort of able to have a conversation with someone that they weren't able to have a conversation for. And I think we're seeing people wanting to use the platform in ways that sort of maybe it starts out there, but if they're going to use it again and again, we'll be moving towards something that is more of a model of people sort of know each other. People sort of have small groups within the large group, and like we also think that like Philip says, like there's good things about that. We want to encourage those things. But I think we definitely have to keep thinking about like what features do we add, what things do we do to facilitate that don't take away from sort of like these open and participant-driven design features of the platform.
I also had a question about I liked the follow-up that gets sent around with people's contact information, and you mentioned that people have to opt in to sharing their contact information. I wondered if, because it seems to me extremely valuable to give people the opportunity to be able to interact after the fact, and yet there might be people who don't want to share their contact information with everybody. I wonder if it has been considered as an option that perhaps everyone could be listed with their picture, since the picture was shared anyway, in the email, and that you could choose after the fact that you wanted to be able to contact someone specific on that list. And so in doing so, you choose to share your contact information with that person, but it might not come back to you unless they decide that they want to respond. So then the email could actually provide a safe interface that first contact that's made, I decided, you know, I've talked to this person and I would trust them with my contact information. So then you can choose to share that information just with them by clicking, because you guys on your end have the contact information for everybody, then you can contact that person on behalf of the person who initiated. Then that person has the choice. If they respond, they make their contact information available, but just to that person who they decided to respond to after they were contacted. Then maybe you could get more people to be willing to be part of potential follow-up interactions, because it wouldn't require them to share their information with the whole group. Have you thought about these alternative ways of sharing contact information beyond the one that you picked? Was that sort of the best of options that you were considering? Has it been kind of an evolution over time, or yeah?
Yeah. So I really like the idea of sort of like the way that you might get someone's contact information is by sharing your own first. I think that's a really nice like way of framing it. I think I should clarify. So when you log into an event for the first time, you have this little dialogue that comes up that says, like, after the event is over, your event organizer might choose to send a wrap-up email that will let you know just the people that you were in a breakout room with and just the people that you directly interacted with in the chat. So it's not a list of everyone who was at the event. It's only people that you had some sort of interaction with already. And then it asks you to input your email, your Twitter handle, or your LinkedIn profile. And it says, like, how would you like to be contacted by one of these people if they're interested in talking with you more, and you can pick the way. And then actually it's not, so everyone is sort of actually opted into that, and in that dialogue you can hit a button that says, I'd prefer not to share my contact information. So I actually probably should say that it's an opt-out, but everyone does see that dialogue and they're presented with it. And we've seen that a lot of people do choose to share their contact information, and I think when we were originally considering integrating the feature, we wanted to make sure that we weren't making it an overwhelming experience for users when they got that email. So we really wanted to see like what are the ways that we can limit it, and we originally considered only doing the people that you were in a breakout room with. But then we decided also to include people that you had interesting chat messages with, since it isn't easy necessarily to end up in a breakout room with someone that you were having a really good conversation with in the chat. Like if there was maybe a way of like being like, oh, let's be in a breakout room together, then maybe it would be okay just to share the breakout room information. And I think, yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, and it's modeled a little bit like normal conference you go to, where like up to a certain size, even if it's 50 people or 80 people, I think we kind of assume that at the end the organizers will send around a contact list of everyone, or that our contact details will be shared with the community. And I think most people are happy to then get more emails. Now, there's a small subset, and I'm pretty sure Caroline is in that set. They're already getting too much email. So they want to make sure that they only get more email people that they really had a meaningful connection with at the conference. And so, like, I think you're an edge case, would be my guess. I think most people are kind of walking to the conference and, okay, they'll share my email with everyone, and I'll get 10 emails afterwards. It's fine. But yeah, I mean, we make it feel like you're going to an event, and then you get to choose if you share, but then kind of assuming that you're technically sharing it with everyone who you run into.
Okay, Oliver said that there are questions from the audience, so I think I'll stop dominating the question time now and let Oliver come in.
And also, please don't share our contact information with anyone after this event.
I already did it, Philip. I already did it.
All right. So one question. Well, the first message is just a comment again on a past experience with Unhangouts, and what the viewer has said is that it was a problem sometimes finding the room that fit a certain purpose. So people had problems finding the room they want to enter before they enter the room. And so I think a couple of things we have discussed so far are going the direction of solving this issue. So if you have a broad overview of what's going on in rooms, you kind of get the idea where you might want to participate. But have you thought about additional ways of making it easier to navigate the existing rooms once they are created?
I don't think so necessarily. We see a lot of events where breakout rooms, like the topic of the room doesn't matter, and so then navigating the rooms just sort of becomes a problem of making sure you can like click on a button to join a room before it gets full, and that should be okay. Typically, we ask people like if they're having problems to say so in the chat, and then like an administrator will create a new room. I think we have seen problems before with the participant proposed sessions. Sometimes people feel like maybe they don't feel comfortable proposing their own session, and they wanted to join one of the sessions that got created, but there isn't any space. And so the thing is that right now when a session gets created, it basically has about 10 spots in it. And if there is more than 10 people that have interest in it, the administrator would have to somehow know that and then create another room with the same title. So that is an interaction that is a little bit tricky and makes it so that it can be hard to find a place that you want to be in.
Another question or comment from the same viewer was, if you use Unhangouts in the context of online learning, then are there ways, or can you think of ways to measure whether the participation in the Unhangouts has an advantage on the learning outcome compared to not participating in this, in these offerings, in these affordances?
I think we haven't necessarily tried to do anything like that specifically. My best hunch would, or the place that I would want to sort of look and explore first would sort of be a little bit less directly related to concrete learning outcomes, and a little bit more tied to do participants feel a greater sense of community with their learning community? Do they feel like they have more control over their learning experience? Do they feel like they talked with someone who had shared interests and they now have a peer who they could ask a question to if they needed to? Like those kinds of things, I would want to sort of measure how Unhangout is able to facilitate those types of interactions, and then maybe make the argument that those things are good for learning outcomes in general.
Mm-hmm. So, and the final question we have is more of a, well, technical one. So if an institution or research group is interested in using Hangouts, can they do so? Do they have to run it themselves, or is there a way of using it as a service? So how are the different ways of making use of your system?
Yeah, so we are open source. Our code is totally open source. So if you wanted to sort of fork our code and run your own server with Unhangout, that's one option. Most people that we interact with don't do that. And we have a version running on our servers at MIT. And if you go to our website, which is unhangout.media.mit.edu, you can request to run an event. And what that does is it sort of submits a little, you have to submit a summary of what your event's going to be, and it comes to our team. We typically approve all requests that we get, and then if your event is sort of, if your team is looking for a little bit more support, we are happy to have like a call. We have some guides that help you sort of get acquainted with the platform if you want to sort of run something yourself. We've seen everything from people just using it on their own without much interaction to us, and we've seen people sort of reach out and ask us to help plan their event design. We are a very small team. There are about 3 of us, so we don't have a ton of time to help people design events, but we are always interested in new and interesting use cases and opportunities for research or opportunities for future collaborations or project. So we're always happy to sort of like field those types of questions.
That sounds very good. I think whoever asked the question will be very happy to hear that. All right, so this takes care of the question part. We have no more questions from the audience. Is there anything that you want to add to the discussion part or to what you have presented? So any one of you have anything to add?
I think my is a little choppy, so I'm not sure if Catherine already said it. We're very much focused on design and development of the platform, and we may be using metrics that are more familiar in technology development projects rather than education research projects, so that's just our bias and interest. But we would love to work with people who want to look at the use of this platform maybe through the lens of more traditional education research. They wanted to see, participants in a MOOC, and there are 2 groups within that MOOC. One group actively participates in the Hangouts, the other doesn't. What's the different experience? What keys they were learning out? So if other people wanted to partner up, that would be great. We'd love to work with them on this. And then the last thing I'd say is also thank you for having us on this set, and also kind of directly back to your group. I think there's a lot of potential both in the chat conversations, but also once we can start looking at audio and video, or audio, I guess, from the videos. The thing that you are able to learn these conversations, there are a lot of applications in the context of these kinds of events, and so we'd love to think a little more about, what do we need to do to be able to get audio for the video conversation so that we can start analyzing that content. What are the things we could do together to help with the grouping at the beginning? We talked a little bit about this, but I just want to say that I'd love to work with you guys more.
Yeah, we'd love to work with you too. I know that we have a meeting scheduled for later on in the day to talk with people in the Unhangout group about collaboration. So looking forward to that.
The final thing I want to do is I want to show you guys my favorite church in the whole world. I don't know if you can see this. It is the Cathedral of Cologne. There we go. Oh, dude. I don't know if that worked, but that's the power of the internet.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That was a very interesting conversation, and so the link will be available from our website, so others who were not able to synchronously attend will be able to watch later. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye.
Bye.